All right, good to go now? Yes. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be giving an update on the work stream that we had last year that was looking into the safe handling guidelines for immersion cooling fluids. So the goal of this work stream was really to develop some practical guidance for the end users of immersion cooling fluids, because a lot of us recognize that a lot of the end users in the data centers might be unfamiliar with the fluid chemistry and how to work with these fluids, and that human factor is very important into encouraging adoption of immersion cooling. So there is a complex diversity of immersion cooling solutions today. You can just look up here at the front of the stage. We have all these different fluid options. So with so many options, it can be difficult to choose which one's the right one and to learn all about the different properties of these fluids. So currently we know there's no immersion-specific codes or standards, and that's something that OCP is really trying to encourage in the future and liaison with these different industry bodies. And as a step towards that, we are trying to get some practical guidance as kind of an intermediary step to getting to that end goal. There's few examples of product-relevant safety guidance out there. You usually have to get the product stewardship guide from the original fluid vendor. So we're trying to take all of that information and really translate it into a digestible document for the end users here. As far as scoping for this group, in scope was really just the fresh, uncontaminated base oil that might be used in these fluids. We cover both single and two-phase fluids. And we really tried to just overview different common fluid hazards, translating things that you might see in the SDS, and helping people interpret what that information means, because looking at an SDS can be quite scary sometimes. So we've developed some universal best practices regarding usage, storage, and disposal of the fluids, and trying to do spill containment plans as well, so people can really start to implement these soon. Out of scope is going to be fluid that's been contaminated or decomposed. We recognize that that is certainly something that people will be interested in, and if that changes the handling of the fluids, and we'll hopefully tackle that in future revisions of the document. Also, different failure scenarios, and then very specific product guidance and different codes are also out of scope for this revision of the document. So a big point that we wanted to touch on in making any sort of safe handling guidelines for immersion cooling fluids is that whenever you look at an SDS sheet, it is actually covering all of the foreseeable uses of a fluid. It covers hazards for different uses that might not actually be relevant to immersion cooling. So if you see, a warning concerning mist generation, that might not be as relevant in the immersion cooling space, where we don't expect to generate a lot of mist like you might if you're using one of these fluids in metalworking. So it's important to recognize that you really have to be knowledgeable of your end use and consult with the fluid provider if these risks are applying to your use case. Also, we just wanted to know that whenever you're going and making that jump to immersion, always make sure that you have a plan with your personnel, site-specific training, have a plan for your facility, and know what you need to implement before you get there, and just make sure that we encourage a lot of training. As I said, we tried to keep the guidelines for this document very practical, since those practical guidelines are pretty lacking today. So one thing we touched on in this is that every deployment should have a spill plan. And so we developed this kind of checklist on things that you should consider if you have a spill plan. You have to recognize what's the size of the spill. Is it just something you can wipe up with a rag, or do you have a bigger problem where you might need a containment source like an oil absorbent boom or some other type of engineering control? So with this plan that we've designed, we cover things like the PPE that is going to be needed when working with these fluids, what type of absorbent materials you can use, is a solvent going to be required to clean, and if you do have to use a solvent, like what Peter touched on, does that bring any additional risk to it whenever you're cleaning things up? And then lastly, just the engineering controls, environmental considerations in your facility and being knowledgeable of those. So we do have a draft of a white paper right now that is in the subcommittee review phase. Kind of here's just an overview of the contents of the white paper. So we've included a glossary because we introduce a lot of new terms to OCP in developing this document, talking about occupational exposure hazards, that sort of thing. So we just wanted to communicate those and define these terms for everyone. It includes an introduction, which just covers the scope of the document, what was the motivation for developing the work stream. And then we have a section that covers different immersion fluid hazards, where we define these by the different fluid classes, again, trying to give really practical guidance and translating what you might find in an SDS into a more digestible format for people to read. We cover different safe handling, product storage and disposal techniques, kind of where we've taken guidance from the fluid vendors, fluid providers, and kind of translated their product stewardship guides into kind of a bullet point list that people can use as a reference when they start to work with immersion cooling fluids. And then lastly, we have a spill procedure and also a cleaning procedure, which is going to be expounded upon in another work stream in the future. So future work for this work stream right now is going to be engagement with the OCP community. Like I said, we've developed this white paper over the past year, and we're really looking for feedback now at this point, especially if you're one of these end users in a data center that's interested in immersion cooling but doesn't have that much experience. We'd love to hear your feedback, specifically if this document meets your needs or what other questions you might still have. Again, we're trying to still align, OCP engagement with those industry standard bodies as we go towards professionalizing this industry in the future. Handling of fluids after usage, so that will be something we also look to develop in the future. Looking into, if any sort of contamination or decomposition that occurs, does that change the hazard class of these fluids or anything that will warrant different types of disposal or handling techniques. And then also in-depth cleaning guidelines, which, as Peter touched on earlier, is going to be covered in a separate work stream at this point. So the obligatory call to action, we'd like for y'all just to use this paper as a tool to get the safety conversation started in the future. We're going to be presenting this, I believe, in a community-wide call next month. So that's another opportunity for y'all to share your feedback with us on this document before it goes to publication in the OCP. So we welcome that, and then hopefully we'll have this white paper out for everyone to read in early 2025. Here's the QR code to scan to join this work stream. And then lastly, just want to end with acknowledgments from the workstream contributors. We are lucky to have, a lot of people who really committed pen to paper metaphorically to help develop this document, which can be no small lift, as I'm sure some of y'all know. So definitely appreciate all of their feedback. And thank you.